Good evening. I'm going to be a very, very short speaker, so we're going to get on to the main event here shortly. But because I'm affiliated with the center and have been a colleague of Jason's now for over a decade, I know where the bodies are buried, and I'm well able to introduce him here tonight. Jason teaches at Hillsdale College in his native Michigan. He's been an editor and a founding writer at the Front Porch Republic online magazine and for its print publication, Local Culture, as well as a number of books. And he oversees a piece of land that's probably too small really to be called a farm, but which is definitely too big to be called a backyard, and it keeps him out of trouble, I think. I've just started reading Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety, and among other things, that book reminds me that there was an era when being a college professor meant certain kind of wonderful things. It meant you knew how to write. It meant you had a real interest in what I am not ashamed to call high culture. And it meant you could kind of expect a certain gentlemanliness. These days, those qualities are not utterly extinct in the professorhood, but you certainly wouldn't necessarily assume it. And those qualities are absolutely extinct in certain individuals, but not in Dr. Peters. He is a beautiful and funny, he is a beautiful and a very funny writer. He is a knowledgeable English professor, and he's an excellent executive editor, not only of books, but also of that magazine I mentioned. And I can tell you from personal experience, he's by far and away the best line editor I've worked with. If I were to make him a T-shirt, it would say, "Grammar is I." He has the additional virtue of being a man who has made a real effort and at times some real sacrifices in order to live according to his principles. And yet I would say he wears his seriousness very lightly, as one who professes Milton, but will cheerfully and often insistently recite you his latest limerick. I think you will enjoy hearing him, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Jason Peters.
I didn't expect that line about the limerick, Kate, but you've tempted me already. Thanks for that kind and entirely factual introduction. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Honestly, in a sense, I don't know how to say thanks, but thank you very much. You can't live forever in the arena. Just ask the early Christians. There's an old joke going around before the Detroit Lions got pretty good, and it was, the Lions are so bad this year, the Christians are asking for a rematch. So it's good to be in friendly territory. It's nice to be among people you can count on to think a little bit, if not a lot, like you. So thank you to all of you for coming out on what I'm sure you think is a cold night. In Michigan, we get all misty-eyed about balmy August nights like this. And I have to confess that I feel a little bit intimidated being in a place with such a knowledgeable audience, people who are more skilled and intelligent about farming than I am. Although I honestly, I don't typically have trouble with public speaking. I can usually think of something halfway intelligent to say. If I can't, I can usually tell enough good jokes so that nobody notices that I never said anything at all. But tonight is a little bit different for me, and so I want you to know that I've taken it mostly seriously. Although I do raise a few hogs, and although I do raise a few lambs And although I tend my fruit trees and berries and garden carefully, and although I keep a hen flock, it's a little smaller than it used to be. We had a thaw a few weeks ago, and I let them out. Within 20 minutes, there was a Cooper's hawk eating one of my Brahma hens. I don't know that he requested chicken as his last meal, but it was his last meal. This was the hawks won't take the hen that quit laying a year ago, or the lame one. It goes right for your best layer. This Brahma was tremendous hen. I called her Michelle O'Brahma. And anyway, I don't know. I think that hawks might be protected by law. It's just that the law doesn't protect them very well in my backyard. So although I do all that on a small acreage, I'm a farmer kind of in the way that Donald Trump is a theologian, or just to keep it partisan in the way former Vice President Harris is a Roman orator. But I do keep myself pretty busy, and I have had a lot of fun doing it. And my next book is going to be about the farm project. It's a testament to what I don't know about what I'm doing. The working title right now is Dispatches from Dumbass Acres. And the subtitle is Being a Mostly Faithful Account of Repatriation, written by an expert in dumbassery. The title of my wife wishes that I would scrap, but I don't intend to scrap it. I intend to keep it. And I feel like I should apologize for coming to you from north of the Ohio River, where there's a proliferation of damn Yankees. I like to think of myself as a native Michigander. I was actually born in Virginia. I was born 6 days before the assassination of President Kennedy on November 22, 1963. And my father was finishing up a post-military stint at the Pentagon. He was there during the Bay of Pigs. And my parents repatriated before I was a year old, so I'm half Virginian, half Michigander, I guess. But every time I think about the state of my birth and its proximity to the assassination of Kennedy, I'm reminded that there were two other writers who died on that day, November 22, 1963, both of whom you've heard of. Aldous Huxley died that day, and he's famous for a book, Brave New World, in which he argued contra George Orwell, it's not what we fear is going to be our undoing, it's what we love is going to be our undoing. And I think at this point, maybe Huxley is winning that battle. The other writer who died that day you've heard of, C.S. Lewis, and not long before that, in the mid-1950s, in two books, The Abolition of Man and That Hideous Strength, he was working out an idea that went like this. He said, the control of nature is not the control of nature. It is the control of some men over other men, with nature as the instrument of control. And I think he was mostly right about that. It also happens to be an idea at the heart of another book that I'm sure you've heard of called The Unsettling of America. And part of what I want to say to you tonight has to do with the manner in which I have tried to keep that book present to my thinking and figure out ways to get it into the hands of undergraduates, which is not always easy to do. And also what I want to say to you tonight is in part response to a pervasive problem that I've been very disturbed by for a long time, and that is that we don't do a very good job of giving our children meaningful work. And we don't articulate for young people well enough what it means to live a meaningful life. These two things go together, keeping the unsettling present to my mind in light of my vocation, and remembering that many of them are floundering and that they can be shown that there are meaningful ways to go through life. But too few people wish to articulate it for them. And so I want to say something about that as well. I'll be using something I'm no good at, which is called PowerPoint. Power corrupts. PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, and also shows how inept I am. I'm the grandson of a farmer, a German Mennonite farmer. My dad's dad spoke English with a thick German accent. My other grandfather on the maternal side was a hardware man. These were capable, beautiful men. They were equal to their needs. My dad's dad had an 8th grade education, and he could do anything. He could fix anything. He's a very taciturn man, drove my grandmother crazy how little he spoke. But when spring came around and he hitched the team to the single bottom plow and got the smile on his face, he came alive in a way that he could sometimes not be the rest of the year. And my other grandfather, the hardware man, he was sort of the Zeus of a small northern Michigan town. And I learned 3 things from these 2 men. One is that you should never treat with contempt work, specifically manual work. My mom's dad was the man who showed me how to change the points in a Briggs & Stratton engine, and his last name happened to be Briggs. He wasn't on the money side of that whole deal, but he was a very, very capable man, much beloved in this small town. They taught me not to treat work with contempt, specifically manual work. They also taught me that if you're not going to carry a pocket knife, you might as well be walking around naked. And the last thing I learned from them is that you should never despise your place. Neither one of them ever acted as if he was too good for the place he was in, and neither of them tried to get out. And that's been very important for me, even though in the case of my dad's dad, I didn't get to know him very much because he died fairly young, in his 60s, of a heart attack. On top of all that, I come from a family in which my farmer grandfather had 3 sons, and none of them farmed. They all left the farm. My wife's father grew up on a farm with 2 brothers as well. All of them left the farm. And we know, thanks to the unsettled America, why that is. They were replaced by credit and machinery and cheap energy. My wife's dad, after he retired as a teacher, started to take up farming again, what he called conventional farming. And so he was doing a lot of corn, soybean rotations, and I would help him sometimes. I'll try to make this story quick, but it's relevant. I hope you'll see why. One day we were turning his fields. One night we were turning his fields. He was trying to get them ready for winter. I don't know what he thought he was doing, exposing them to the winds of erosion, I guess. But I found myself sitting in the cab of an enormous case tractor. I was pulling a chisel plow. I had a bank of lights on to see where I was going. He was behind me in another tractor with a field cultivator. And we had just finished about a 45, 50 acre field. And it was about 11 o'clock at night. And he says to me, why don't we go, there's one more field I'd like to go do, if you don't mind. I said, yeah, okay, in for a dime, in for a dollar. He says, it's going to take us 20 minutes to drive there. So I followed him. And he said, it's going to take us 45 minutes to get back to my farm. I said, whatever, we'll do it. The closer we got to this place, the more I couldn't believe what was happening to me. We pulled into a meager 10-acre plot to turn those 10 acres so that he could put them into corn, and it was right across the farmhouse my dad grew up in, right across from the farm. My dad worked as a boy. And it was a field, very small field, that my grandfather would drive his cattle to let them graze briefly before he moved them on. And it was a really kind of interesting experience for me to see what had been lost in about half a lifetime. The barn at the farm was gone. The only thing that remained was the machine shed. My dad's younger brother still lives there, but the land is not productive anymore. There are no farms left on the road. There are no barns left. And we're driving these big rigs down small roads for an extra 10 acres of corn and soybeans. was up there in that cab thinking, I wish I were a novelist. I would do something with this. And then I thought, hey, I know a novelist. Maybe I can get him to do something with this. It's a really a tough irony, I think, to see what had happened to that field in the course of half a lifetime. But that's where we are, and that's one of the problems that we're facing. For better or worse, it's been my vocation to flap my gums before undergraduates and to tell them about work and about love of place and how they ought to carry a knife, and to tell them what I think few of my colleagues are willing to tell them, which is to say they should be local, not global citizens. There's no such thing as a global citizen. You can't live in a globe. You live in a place. And so I have tried in various ways to do this, and what I want to tell you tonight is about a program that I was running for a while. I'm curious to know what you think about it, whether it was foolish, whether it was not foolish. But the whole point was to get these kids to understand something about food production and to get them interested in food production. And so I don't know if you can read this quotation from Wendell's essay, The Love of Farming, here, in which he said, how are we going to get through to these knuckleheads? This is a big question. How are we going to get through to them? And my answer to the question, how are we going to restore local cultures, how are we going to restore respect to farmers, is that we've got a lot to do, and what I have to say is only a very small part of it. But I really do strongly believe that we have to get to these young people, and we have to get to them with intelligence and with persuasiveness, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This quotation ends with Wendell saying, the current farm policy is making it possible, essentially, for us to eat our way into starvation. We're really doing something extraordinarily stupid here, and we've got to figure out a way to do it better. So I want to tell you the story about, here we go, we'll see if I can manage this. The story of four idiots, I guess you could say. Gary is a chef, and Jim is a farmer, was a farmer. I'm sorry to say he died of a heart attack in his late 60s, not 4 or 5 years ago. A colleague of mine named Charlie, who's a professor of geography, and yours truly. We decided to do something that we didn't think we would get anywhere with, and it turns out that we actually did. This is my colleague Charlie, and what happened, I'll try to make this part quick. We're out on a farm right now, and he's talking. He was a good talker. The college that I was teaching at for 25 years in Illinois, the administration decided that they were going to implement a new graduation requirement for everybody. And that graduation requirement was you have to take what they called a learning community. And it was an attempt to get us outside of our own silos, and that's, aside from the fact that it's an abuse of two words, both learning and community. The idea was to try to look at a set of problems from two disciplines, and since the disciplines don't talk to each other, we can at least pretend like they talk to each other. And we decided we was going to make this a graduation requirement for everybody. So Charlie and I jumped on this, and we offered what was called the Environmental Literature and Landscape Learning Community. I don't think it's a terrible idea, but what it really is a Band-Aid on a more serious problem, the siloing of our thinking. And he offered a course in geography, and I was just trying to figure out a way to smuggle the unsettling of America into an English class, and this was the best way I could think of it. I should mention quickly this. When we were planning this thing, we said we got to get these kids' attention early on. We got to get them to see that what we're talking about matters, it has some bearing in their lives. So what we did, is we gave them a reading assignment before the first day of class and an exam on the first day of class. Right? You have to read, one of the things that we gave them was Michael Pollan's essay from the New York Times Magazine called Power Steer. It became a chapter in his book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. And in that essay, what he does is he buys a steer, and his question is, what's it going to cost to fatten this thing up, and what's my profit going to be at the end of all this? And it turns out the expenses are really high. You've got to pay a lot of money to give an animal that was made to eat grass a lot of corn. And you got to pay a lot of money to transport that corn. And the fuel costs are high, and the transport costs are high. The price of antibiotics is high. And when it's all done, Michael Pollan realizes he just has made no money raising a steer this way. And we kind of got their attention with that. You're doing things bass-ackwards. This animal was not made to eat and to live this way. The other thing we gave them was the first 60 pages of James Howard Kunstler's book, The Long Emergency. Think what you will about Kunstler. He's an entertaining writer, and he does a really good job in the first 60 pages of that book of explaining the story of oil and the story of how theories about peak oil came along and what he calls the long emergency that we're sleepwalking into. He says we are woefully unprepared for an energy-scarce future. And he says, among other things, he says, it's been estimated that the global population before the Industrial Revolution was about 1 billion people, and from that we've inferred that the population can be sustained at about that number on non-industrial terms. But if you enlarge the population as we have with sulfa drugs, antibiotics, the infusion into farming of ancient sunlight, massive amounts of ancient sunlight, and nitrogen-based fertilizers, we're going to raise the carrying capacity of the earth temporarily. But the temporarily thing is the spooky part. Like, how's the landing going to be? Are we going to crash when we get into the energy-scarce future? And what happens when we realize all the old ways are lost? Nobody knows how to do anything the old way anymore. Well, we assigned these two things, and it worked. We got their attention. So it turned out to be a pretty successful academic exercise for us, until it turned out that the college couldn't staff these requirements, and so we had to take the requirement away. Well, I think we sustained it for maybe 5 or 6 years. And we had good enrollments. We had 2 sections a year of about 40 total students. And we had a couple of goals to give students a traditional education in these 2 disciplines. But we also wanted to get them out of the classroom and give them some hands-on work to do. I'm just tired of people who don't know how to do anything. One of the jokes that we pulled on the kids once, we took them out to this farm, and I would say to them, "Listen, around the barn there's a potato tree. Why don't you go pluck a few potatoes for us?" And I could always get some takers. It was really kind of discouraging, but I could always get some takers. So our ultimate goal was to get them gardening and onto a farm and learn something about food production. And we had no idea how this was going to work. We just had no clue. But we did have some fun along the way, including our annual trip to the Land Institute, where we could meet Wendell Berry, who had more hair at the time. I actually had darker hair at the time. Those are fun kids. And we could see how Wendell's able to sign a book without looking at it. One of my favorite students right there. But we didn't know how to get him on the farm. We had no real contacts, and so we said, well, how about we try something else at first? And this was before the financial crash of 2008. And the college was buying up houses in the neighborhood. And so we went to the administration and we said, you're buying up this house just up the road from the president's mansion. How about you give it to us? And we'll take the students in there and we'll teach them a few things. We'll teach them how to seal up the envelope. We'll teach them how to change windows. We'll teach them what to do about a damp basement. We'll make this thing as interesting as we can. And the college cooperated. They gave us a $50,000 budget to do this, which was kind of nice. So you can see the students are, one of the first things we tried to tell them is that water generally rolls downhill and the grade next to the house has to be fixed. So one of the first things we did is fix the grade. There's what it kind of looked like at first. It was a mess inside. We said, you know what, that's a pretty nice cast iron sink. We're going to pull it out. We're going to redo the drywall, and we're going to put that same sink back in. We have to buy a new one. It's perfectly fine. I had a colleague who, before he went off to do his PhD, had hung a lot of drywall. He came in and gave them a lesson in taping and plastering. We pulled the sink out, that's what it looked like, and it looked a lot better when we finally put it back in. And you got to understand, there's a real problem here. These kids are itinerants. They're from somewhere else. They don't have work boots. They don't have what they need. What they have is whatever tools and whatnot we can give them. And whatever tools we can give them without HR finding out that we're doing it and, lawyering up and all that stuff. But we had to get rid of the boiler and put a heating system in. So we got in touch with this guy. He was a graduate of this college. And he had developed a geothermal system, which was really kind of an interesting setup. And so we said, can you do a geothermal system here? And he came into a space about the size of this room, backyard. And he actually put in something like 7 loops, kind of at a diagonal from this spot. And he had a really interesting way of doing it. And he was a good talker. He was really good at explaining things. And so we had to do some drill tests first. And he brought this kind of bobcatish thing in, and he was running it on biodiesel fuel, and he had kind of invented the method of doing these cores. And he came in and he did this, and we put in a geothermal system pretty inexpensively. Out of that $50,000 budget, we wanted 2 big-ticket items. The geothermal system and a metal roof. We wanted to put a metal roof on it because that's the visible thing. We got them both. And the college said to us, well, we got to pave that driveway. It's no good, so we're going to call a cement contractor. Said, no, we're not putting cement in there. We're putting permeable pavers in there. And they said, no, you're not. It costs too much. And we said, well, here's the bid. And suddenly it became a good idea because it was cheaper than the concrete. But the point is, let the rainwater get back into the ground if it possibly can. Keep it out of the storm sewer system. These are the sorts of things that Charlie was trying to get these kids to understand in his land and resource management class. And it was a lot of fun. It was really kind of fun to do this. But we still weren't in a garden. We still weren't in a farm. We're still doing whatever hands-on things we can think of to do in the neighborhood when there's something to do. Got the metal roof on. That was nice. We put a bamboo floor in. I had a friend who ran a bakery. Their specialty was desserts for diabetics. And he'd get these big barrels with molasses and vanilla in them for making desserts. And I asked him one day, what do you guys do with those barrels? He said, we just throw them out. I said, can I have them? He says, if you can come get them, you can have them. So we come up with a design for rain barrels, and the kids made them and sold them. And we put the profits back into the program. In fact, I have one of these next to my hen house right now after all these years. This is a story that is worth hearing, and I'll try to make it quick. These 2 guys came to me, really kind of soft hands. You could tell they were headed for a life of sitting down. All their exercise would come from index finger clicking a mouse. And they said to me, there's a place behind our frat house. We think it might have been a garden. I said, why is that? And they said, well, there's a fence around it. It's got a lot of weeds in it. I said, that's a garden, all right. and they all had to do this sort of hands-on project. So they said, well, can we convert that back into a garden? I said, yeah, sure, have at it. That'll be great. And so they did. They were not skilled at identifying poison ivy, I'm afraid. But you can see they got it cleared out pretty nicely. They worked really hard on this. And in the summers when the weeds came back, I was the one over there, fighting them, keeping the place alive. But they did a pretty nice job with it. They actually put in a straw bale greenhouse here. These windows were ones that I had taken out of my house. I was changing them out over the course of 4 or 5 years, and I kept some of the old ones for this purpose exactly. So they put in a straw bale greenhouse, and they were growing vegetables into February in the backyard of their frat house. And they really got into it. I have my doubts about it, but they really got into it. And this will be the last part about this story. I was in class one day, and I got a phone call from a reporter at USA Today. And she wanted to do a story on what we were doing in the classroom, this thing called learning community, the abuse of 2 words, learning and community. And she was giving me the time. These kids should be learning their math, and they should be learning their STEM, and they should be learning their, what are you doing this for? And I said, well, how about you talk to one of them? And they were in my buddy Charlie's class at the time. So I went over to his classroom. I just pulled him right out of the classroom and put him on speaker and said, talk to this woman, will you? And they converted her to the faith. And this glowing article came out in USA Today about these two kids. And it was the first time the administration really thought that I was worth the hire, the trouble of my being hired. Great kids, really fun. One of them's an English teacher now, and one's I think he's a hospital administrator. Then it happened. Our director of dining, the plump fellow here on the left, Gary, went to a weekend conference, and he met this farmer named Jim Johansson. And Gary got back from the conference, and he said to me, expect a call from this farmer on Monday morning. And so I got the call from this farmer. And he says, I hear you're looking for a place to looking for a farm to get your students on. I said, yeah, we are. He said, well, you come out to my place. So we met Jim. And we took a bunch of students out. We took them out on the first Friday of the semester. And he gave him a tour of his operation. Jim had been he'd left the farm, he'd been a seed salesman. He came back to the farm, working very hard, good guy, good talker, great to be around. And he could really talk to kids. He showed them the operation. It's his wife Linda there. Got him out on a nice sunny day. That always helps. I remember taking my daughter to visit a college, and it was raining, so the college was no good. Got to be sunny. This is always a weather problem. And we had a couple hours because our classes were back to back, and Jim got done with his talk, and we said to the students, all right, now get the strawberry patch weeded. And a lot of them are grumbling, I didn't spend this money to come out here and do this. And I'm thinking, well, if you're spending all that money, the two things are true. You come from money, and your grades aren't very good because nobody's paying that much money for tuition. Also, you are going to weed the garden, the strawberries, because that's where we're at. 40 kids attacked this thing, and we got that done in an hour and a half. And Jim was so grateful. I mean, he could never have done this and everything else that he had to do. And it was, they were really having a lot of fun. We put up, I didn't show these pictures to HR. But I will, in my defense, say that Jim is the one standing in the bucket of the tractor as we're putting up this hoop house. His plan was to do Eliot Coleman's method, which is a larger hoop house with smaller hoop houses inside it, and you can move your growing region up a couple of notches. That was a lot of fun. My favorite slide of them all, I think, is the kid sitting on the tractor playing with his phone. This guy could not be talked to. There was no way to break him out of his indolence, but I'm glad I have a record of it. They always wondered how you get apples out of tall branches. Well, this is how you do it. This is one of my favorites. I took this photograph. This girl, she had the college logo on her shirt. Okay, she's an attractive girl. She's picking an apple. In other words, she's doing anything except homework. She's not conjugating verbs. She's not working through calculus. She's not reading War and Peace. So this goes on the promotional material. Like, come here and you wear the logo and pick apples. And to heck with Greek. Tara was her name. I didn't get a dime for that photo either. These guys got interested in picking apples when they got their midterms back. There was a young orchard there. We helped mulch. I had a baseball player with a broken ankle, so he was in the Kubota there, and that's one of my old pickup trucks. Dearly beloved 83 Dodge. Just stopped him in time from creasing the bed of that thing when he lowered the bucket. My older son was lucky enough to be the professor's kid, so we got to drive the Kubota. He's now 24. He got to help harvest the groundhogs. One of the kids actually skinned these things and ate them, and I tried it. It tasted like stew, it just tasted like roast beef, something like that. I mean, the things were eating good vegetables, so they had to be producing good meat. These girls were planting cabbages with Jim, the farmer, and Dana became the first intern on the farm. We worked out a deal that the director of dining would pay half the salary, and Jim would pay the other half of the salary, and we'd put an intern on his farm every summer. This girl had never been on a farm before. Her painted sorority toenails had never been on a farm. And she was completely smitten by this whole project. She brought hundreds of kids out as volunteers over the course of the semester and served as the first intern. And then we got the campus garden. There was this place on the north end of the campus, and I went to the president and I said, "You got this 3/4 of an acre there, and all the kids do is use it for frisbee and beer pong. Can we have that? Can we make a garden there?" He was, understandably skeptical because he didn't think that we would maintain it, but he let us do it. So we put a garden, and these two kids on the left-hand slide were the first gardeners. They both had full-time jobs in the summer, and they would come after the jobs and work in the garden in the late afternoons and evenings, and they were our first keepers of the campus vegetable garden. The slide on the right is a colleague from history helping himself to the arugula. We decided we needed picnic tables down there. Some kids said, "Well, can we make picnic tables as part of our project?" I said, "Sure, but you're going to have to make them off campus because you're going to be using power tools, and I'll get in trouble if you use them on campus." So they did. I put this slide on there at the top left because the guys were trying to put a diagonal brace in and having a hard time of it. And the girls who were on the project said, "Well, why don't you turn the table upside down?" So we combined brains and brawn, and we got the thing done. We did a lot of illegal things. I decided we needed a place to put our equipment, and I had some money in the budget, so I ordered some lumber. And on Friday, I said to the kids, "Meet me down at the garden on Saturday. We're going to build a shed." Nice day, cool fall day. So they came down there. I say it's the field office because I kept a lawn chair in there and I could hold office hours down there. No phone, no computer, no students. It was great. So we did it. We put it up pretty much in a day. Next to it, there was a sloped piece of land that we didn't want to till, so we put an orchard in there in one afternoon. Sometimes it's best not to have very many people helping you because you don't get very much stuff done. Nobody knew how to square a floor, so they learned that day. Learned how to read a level. That was a new skill to this cross-country runner. And back then I was young enough I could spit nails into the wood instead of using a hammer. And then we got this thing done, put a metal roof on it. I ended up putting hanging gutters on it and putting rain barrels on there and whatnot. But we had this kid who was goofing off. He wasn't doing anything. And then like the last week of classes, he thought, "Uh-oh, I'm a senior. I need this to graduate." And so he came to my office and he said, "Is there anything I can do to pass this class?" And normally my answer to that is, "Yeah, you can be born someone else." But I said, "I tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. You go down and stain that shed, and I'll think about it," because he hadn't done anything. So he stained part of it, and then he decided the staining wasn't going on fast enough, so he cut it with paint thinner. And so I had basically a two-tone shed when he was done, and I had to go finish it myself anyway. And I decided I didn't want him in class for a second semester, so I passed him with a D. Gave him a gentleman's D for a half-assed job on the shed. The grounds crew would vacuum up the leaves on campus, and they always had trouble figuring out what to do with them. I said, "Give them to me. Take them down there. We'll use them for mulch. We'll use them for weed control." And so we were never wanting for leaves. The kids themselves held a market on Fridays. Their idea was you can come down here and buy vegetables, or if you want to pick them, you get them at half price. Faculty, staff would go down there. And they ran this thing pretty successfully for several years. this kid who's in the right-hand slide is actually a farmer now. One of my best literature students, but he's actually farming now. And then the director of dining, he was a great guy. You know, he had come in and he had said to his staff, "We are not doing this the way you've been doing it. We're going to get food and cut it and prepare it and make things and cook it and feed real food to the student body." And all the staff was crazy. You got to be out of your mind. We just put frozen lasagna in the oven and we're done. And he got pretty good buy-in from his staff fairly quickly, because one of the things he said was, we're going to take that farmer Jim, we're going to take 100% of his produce. Like, that fast, the farmer had a buyer for 100%. The college was a buyer for 100% of his produce. And we were starting to branch out into other farms here. The four of us had gone to the John Deere headquarters, which was down the road about 7 miles, big complex, has a dining service there. We set up a meeting with the director of dining, and we said, "How about, you guys are John Deere, right? You're interested in farmers? Is that true? How about you do what we're doing and buy your food from local farmers and make food instead of the frozen lasagna tray?" This guy looked at us like we were from Mars. "What are you, why would I do anything like that?" He's one of the guys we couldn't get on board, but our own director said, "Look, why don't you I got to pay to have my cooking oil hauled away. Why don't you guys do something with it?" So I got the CEO of the college to give me $6,000 to get this biodiesel converter, which can convert convert fryer oil to biodiesel fuel at an almost 1-to-1 ratio at the time for about 70 cents a gallon, which was a little bit less than the going rate, which is over $4. And I regret to say we never did it. I couldn't get institutional buy-in on it. I could not get the college to cooperate on this. We needed a containment pad. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't build it. And it sat unused in a building for about 10 years. And when I left that school 4 years ago, I was talking to the comptroller who had been a student in this program. And he said, "What do you ever do with that biodiesel thing?" And I said, "We never used it." And he says, "Well, do you want it?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "After 10 years, we don't consider it property. We just write it off." And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll take it." So he prepared the documents for legal counsel, and it's mine now. I put it in the back of my pickup truck and drove it 400 miles down the road through Gary, Indiana, to our place in Michigan. Might be the only person who's ever done that. And so now it's sitting in my barn unused, because I don't know from chemistry. But I'm trying to get the chemistry department at Hillsdale to get interested in this. This is the last slide. One of the things that I was surprised by is how right John Crow Ransom was in the 1930s when he said, "It's a modest demand that labor partake of happiness." These kids were really happy doing something they had never done, never seen done before. And the effects may have been minimal, but I know that there are some of these students who are really committed to local living. They're committed to supporting local agriculture. They're gardening in some way. Some of them are, in fact, farming. They learned those 3 things that my grandfathers taught me. Don't despise work. Don't treat a place like it's something you got to get away from. Try to be worthy of it, and bring your pocket knife when you're doing it. That's my riff on this amazing paragraph from Wendell's essay, Love of Farming, which I wish to leave you with, again, is the last slide. Thanks for your attention. It's been really great. Thank you for bringing me here. Maybe we have a minute for questions, Michelle?
Yes.
I'd be glad to bumble through an answer.
Have any questions?
Do you have a limerick?
There was a young fellow named Clyde who fell in the outhouse and died. He had a twin brother who fell in the other, and now they're interred side by side. That's the only clean one I know.
Jason, are you doing anything like this at Hillsdale?
A couple of things are starting to happen. It's a little bit more difficult. Yeah, sure. Lee asked if I'm doing anything like this at Hillsdale now. A couple things are starting to happen. It's a little bit more difficult because we have a much tighter core curriculum, for one thing. And in my department, we have a much tighter curriculum. Where I came from, we had loosened things up, so you could get an English degree without reading Shakespeare. Whereas at Hillsdale, you start with Anglo-Saxon and you end with contemporary, and we make you get it all. So it's a little bit harder to put a course like this into the curriculum, but the college did just buy a huge orchard that was up for sale with hoop houses and barns, and the students have put a hen flock out there, a pretty sizable hen flock. I haven't been invited in on this yet, and I don't want to muscle my way in on it, but I'm glad that it's happening, and at a certain point, I will probably have something to do with it. I hope so. Especially if I make one last move in my life and get closer to work than I am right now.
Anybody else? Who are the youngest people that were involved in the project?
We would get a few sophomores.
Repeat the
Sorry,
question,
yeah. Question is, who are the youngest kids who were involved in the project, besides my son? I would take all of my kids to some of these things. They were mostly juniors and seniors because available seats for these classes were limited, so the juniors and seniors got first dibs. Occasionally we would get sophomores in there. One year, we decided to limit one section to juniors and seniors and leave the second section open to sophomores only because we wanted to have students who were going to come back the next year and be a part of it, and the next year and be a part of it, and see if we could manufacture some continuity there. And it did work a little bit, but mostly there were juniors and seniors. Leah?
Could you talk a little bit about how the experiences helped the students to understand the literature in a different way?
Yeah. How did the experiences help the students understand the literature in another way? I didn't take the time to talk about my own syllabus here, but like I said, the main object was to get the unsettling of America in front of these kids and say, this is one of the most important books of the previous century. And you got to have it on your... Don't invite me to a cocktail party 20 years from now when I say, that reminds me of something Wendell said, and I go to your bookshelf looking for it and it's not there. I'll throw my drink in your face. You have to have this book, and it's got to be on your shelves. They became pretty good readers, I think. That book takes patience. It's a very deliberate book. And they became pretty good readers of that. I put Aldo Leopold in front of them. I put some of the 19th century natural historians in front of them. We did Thoreau and Walden as well. Some of you know David Orr. We read some of his stuff. They were clear in this. We didn't expect to like any of this stuff. But those two things you made us do before the first day of class got our attention, and the work made us better readers of this literature. It was a fun syllabus to do. I just had a blast reading this stuff year after year. Leopold's great line, he's talking about, I've got a prejudice for the pine instead of the birch. Why is that, North of here, the birch is more plentiful than the pine. Would I be pro-birch if my farm were north of here? And then he says 4 words that are amazing. My farm is here. Like, here is not there, it's not anywhere else, it's here. And they would never, I think, have understood that line without the hands-on work.
Did that contract buying from the farmer continue?
No, unfortunately, a few things happened. Gary, the chef, took another job in South Carolina, which he immediately regretted and retired from. And Jim died a few years later of heart attack. My colleague Charlie, who's quite a bit older than I, retired, and his wife is Swedish. They moved to Sweden. And then in 2012, when my mom and my wife's mom got sick, I moved my family to Michigan, and so we could look after them. And so for 9 years, I was commuting 400 miles one way to this job until I switched jobs 4 years ago. And so I think the most honest way to put that is the program failed because of hypermobility. It failed because the people in it left, or in the case of Jim, died. And so again, you can see the importance of a devotion to a place for making something like this stick, especially when you've got itinerant students who are at the heart of it. Again, Wendell had this figure. I'm glad he wasn't the fourth guy who died on November 22, 1963. I'm glad he made it 14 more years so we could have that great book.
I know the core curriculum in Hillsdale is pretty locked in, but so I don't know what you teach there, but are you able to teach any Wendell, introduce students?
Oh, I talk about, the question is, am I able to introduce any of Wendell's stuff? 2/3 of my load is general education courses in great books. Great books ancient, great books modern. 1/3 of my load is in the department, in the major. So I'll teach a 19th century course in American Lit before the Civil War, or something at the 400 level of my own choosing. Often a Moby Dick seminar, a Melville seminar. So there's not, we have to do that. That's our contribution. But my students right now are reading the Eliot and the Odyssey, and I got all kinds of things to say about Wendell when I'm reading the Eliot and the Odyssey. Think of all those heroes who die. And their fathers are named, and their mothers are named, and where they came from are named, and the woman they never got to marry is named, and the land that they managed is named, and then Homer's pretty serious about this. This guy's not going home. In a poem about Cleos and Time, in a poem about glory and honor, Homer cares desperately about homegoing. And even in the Iliad. And then when you get to the Odyssey, it's like, heck with glory. I want to go home to Penelope and Telemachus, and I want to be home. So when I'm trying to explain how extraordinary it is that Homer is an advocate for homegoing in a poem about war, then I slip a little Wendell in there. I said, by the way, you guys got to read this, or you got to read that. First day of class, I had 2 kids from Kentucky. I was looking through where they came from so I could say something about where they came from. And this is one guy from Kentucky. I called his name out, and I said, you're from such and such Kentucky? He says, yeah, yes, sir, he says. I said, who's the greatest living writer from your home state? No clue. No clue. And the girl sitting in front of me, whom I know are sisters, I had them in class, and she's from Kentucky. I said, you know, don't you? She had it just like that. Some of them know, some of them don't know. They all know by the time it's over with. Lewis and Tolkien used to say they didn't like the children's books that were out there, so they had to write their own, but what they wanted, they just sneak in the back door, into their books. That's kind of the way I am with this agrarian stuff. Get it in there somehow. I like that question, Lee. Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, on behalf of my wife who runs the bookstore here, we have almost every good book on the shelves already. But what have you got in your syllabus? What have you got that you've taught? Some deep cuts for us. What wouldn't be on the shelves that we ought to have?
I didn't make what books should be on your shelves here that aren't there already? I didn't make an exhaustive survey of it when I was perusing the shelves earlier. I'd noticed that my food book is not on there. That's a darn shame. I sold out, yeah. Well, I'm glad those 5 copies sold. I might buy that pack of gum I always wanted to buy. Actually, I got a royalty check from Notre Dame for the book by John Crowe Ransom that I edited, his book on the agrarian economy land. And I think the check was for, it was a holdover from 3 years. You don't get a check unless, you meet a threshold. And I think it was for $17 or something like that. So if you want to make money in this racket, you got to be publishing in the agrarian stuff. I think Aldo Leopold's *The River of the Mother of God* is a not very well known book of his, which has wonderful stuff in it. I would make sure that was on the shelves along with Sand County Almanac. I do think Michael Pollan's *Omnivore's Dilemma*, it was a little bit too precious for me at the end, but I think it's still an important book, and I hope people have the patience to read that. You could, I think, go through all of Wendell's essays and see all the stuff that he makes reference to, and argue that all this is relevant to the important and hopeful work that's being done here: Paradise Lost, the Odyssey. I go back in this essay. The next thing Berry does here is he starts talking about Goethe's Faust, and I remember reading this for the first time, saying, "Okay, how's he going to make this work?" And he makes it work. Faust doesn't want the narrow life of the row in the garden with a hoe. And so Mephistopheles says, well, I guess it's going to have to be the witches. And Wendell's remark is, yeah, the witches for us are exactly what we see going on. It's the high energy inputs, it's the displacement of people, it's the whole industrial program. So you could make a case, a very good case, that as far as the middle part of the 19th century, anything that you can read in British and American literature is relevant. Wendell's written beautifully on Wordsworth's poem Michael, the finest of the Grassmere poems as far as I'm concerned. And he quotes Alexander Pope frequently, Wes Jackson quotes Pope frequently. It's really not until the late 19th century when we start, it happens before the Second World War. We see the departure from farms to cities, and I've got these stats somewhere that are really kind of horrifying. But up until about the end of the 19th century, almost everything that you read in British and American literature seems to respect our fallenness. It seems to respect the really good chance that we're going to screw things up. And one of the reasons I like to read old books and get students to read old books is they've never heard this before. What? They got the Ben Franklin approach. We're perfectible. We can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. They tried this and they end up pulling themselves up by their own jock straps. I'm glad to hear you're going to edit this because sometimes I forget and tell a dirty limerick. But I'll make this quick. Here's an example. This is a good reading experiment. So most of you know that Hawthorne wrote a novel called The Blithedale Romance, which is a story about a utopian community. And there's no such thing. Well, that's what utopia means. There's no place. And Hawthorne is deeply suspicious of our ability to improve. Melville was deeply suspicious too. There's a book in the American 19th century called Looking Backward. Maybe you've heard of this, by a guy named Edward Bellamy. Most political theorists know about this book. It is an awful book. It's terrible. It is the most poorly executed novel you'll ever read in your life. And everything is great. There's nothing we can't fix, including the human heart, apparently. And if you read that book, who's the main character? Dr. Lead, is that right? Lead, I remember. The question is, how did you fix all these problems? And the answer is always, well, nothing could be simpler. And it turns out that there is just this enormous squid-like central government taking care of anything. Nobody cooks. Nobody goes to church. They just turn a dial and listen to whatever sermon they want to get from wherever is going on. And everything is great. You can leave without your umbrella because the sidewalks get covered if it starts raining, and there's no living close to the weather. That's another thing these kids learned. You got to live close to the weather. Hawthorne comes along and he says, "You got to be kidding me. We're not good enough to pull this off. We're not the kind of creatures who can pull this off." Long story, long answer. I think there's plenty in the humanities, especially in it's a plug for my discipline, especially in my discipline, for finding real attachment to land and to place and to work. I mean, I can't speak highly enough of the poem Michael by Wordsworth. Wordsworth can, of course, be very tedious, which I hope I'm not being, by the way.
In the presentation, the young people really looked like they were enjoying themselves. There was sort of a tension between sort of the grumbling and the joy. I wonder if you could talk more about that, the joy of getting dirty.
What's the tension between the grumbling and the joy, and how does that end up playing out? The grumbling came early, and it disappeared early for the most part. And that first surprised me, and after a while, I ceased to be surprised. But of course, it's going to go away. For some of them, for the first time in their life, they've been given something meaningful to do, and they have something to show for themselves at the end of the day, and that's a real evangelist. That's a real evangelical part of the project, and I'm not making this up. They were, most of them, pretty rapid converts, and they understood the John Crow Ransom quotation. It is a modest demand that labor partake of happiness. And most of them have this idea that it's not going to partake of happiness. It's going to be drudgery for 50 out of 52 weeks out of the year. I got to say, it was one of the most rewarding things I've done in 40 years of teaching, and seeing the way the kids responded to it. And to this day, I get kids now. They know I have a farm, and they want to come up and talk to me. I had some guys a couple of years ago. They say, "You know what? We've never ever eaten anything we've killed." I said, "Well, I can fix that. Come on up to my place." I gave them a couple of hens that weren't laying anymore. I mean, these aren't meat birds, but they don't know that. And you know what they did? They drove all the way back to campus. They've got a dormitory that's kind of horseshoe shape, so there's a courtyard in the back. Damned if they didn't slaughter those chickens in that courtyard, pluck them, and make chicken stew out of them. And I don't know how many campuses you can get away with doing that on, but all I told them was, "You didn't get the hens from me. I don't care what you do. You didn't get the hens from me." And I get these kids coming up on weekends to visit all the time. Can we give you 2 hours of work? Can we do something besides pretend we're at a place we like to be, doing things we like to do? That's not quite that bad. But and then let me just add this, if I may, to go back to the going through Homer. The other day in class, I was trying to make this point. I said, Homer really cares about the nostos. He really cares that be an option, even in the Greek world. And Odysseus will be damned if he's not going to get back to Penelope. And I was kind of running the Berry line on this. Wendell's point is, the story has always been departure and return until our day. And now the prodigal son goes and doesn't come back, and Odysseus goes and he doesn't come back. I said, you folks, you're probably being trained to work in one of 4 cities in North America. And you have people that you have debts to, and you can go home and you can pay those debts, and you can be in your home place. Invariably, I'll get a few students who come up to me and they'll say, "We've never heard anybody say that to us before." That's really good news. I mean, I just assumed that I didn't have this choice. And in fact, if you don't give them a choice, they don't have a choice. And many of them are very glad to know that it is a sign of going places to go to go back home. It took us a long time to do it, but it took a couple of our parents getting ill to light a fire under us. But what a joy to we're a 5-minute walk through the woods from where my wife grew up, and we're 7 miles from where I grew up. And we were useful to my dad when he died 10 years ago, and we're useful to our mothers now. And our kids get to see that. So that when I'm a mess, by God, they can take care of me.
Thank you.